Originally, I was never really into Souls games, or Souls-like, tending to favour first-person shooters or MMOs instead. As much as my brother tried to get me to play Dark Souls or Elden Ring, even offering to buy the game for me, I couldn't say that I was even the least bit tempted. That all changed with Lies of P. The world instantly enticed me, and something about the art style drew me in. I was more fascinated by the artistic design choices and the world building than the game systems or mechanics themselves. But it was enough to get the foot in the door, and when I did eventually play it, the game hooked me. I think the primary difference between Lies of P and Dark Souls was that Lies of P felt more magical, owing to the Pinocchio retelling and the setting of the game. It felt like it had that much more of a story, and it was enough to give it a shot, at the very least. What happened, to my surprise, was that the game excelled beyond all my expectations. It was not clunky with a keyboard and mouse as other Souls-likes often are. It was quick and responsive, especially with the combat, and a heavy emphasis on parrying. There was a clear risk and reward that fueled my desire to parry everything. It was, however, more challenging than I expected initially, as I played far too aggressive, considering I had no idea what the enemies would be doing, and eventually I would be forced to take a step back and observe first, attacking where I can and being defensive where I needed to be. I now realise that is the beauty with the Souls games. You were taught through the suffering of failure, and the other side is made all that much sweeter when you finally succeed. Eventually, I completed the base game with all achievements and looked in anticipation for Overture. And now, it's finally here. It was well worth the wait. Overture takes place as a prequel to the first game. You are transported to the city of Krat in its final days of haunting, late 19th century. On the brink of the Puppet Frenzy massacre, you follow a legendary stalker through untold stories and chilling secrets, and throughout the playthrough you will discover more about new and familiar characters. Stepping into Overture was rough at first, only made difficult by the fact that I hadn't played in a while, and initially I wondered if the game was always this tough, or if the difficulty had been spiked as it was a DLC. There is also now an option to lower the difficulty, with the default being the highest one you can access straight away, and harder difficulties appear to be unlockable on the boss rush mode. I did consider lowering the difficulty, however, recalling the sense of accomplishment from the base game and overcoming the challenges it threw at me, I opted to stick with the default difficulty and persevere through my many, many deaths. The enemies which you first face provide an adequate challenge, although quickly ramp up as they introduce tougher versions and elite monsters, continually ramping until you reach the bosses. Although I would say it was early on that I had two main gripes with the DLC, possibly still owing to my lack of practice with the game. While the enemies themselves weren't too difficult, quickly learning the few moves that they have or approaching them with hesitance as I observed their attacks and learnt when to parry, which also, I must say that just as the base game, the moves are very well telegraphed. Unfortunately though, there are a considerable number of gank spots very early on into the game, and this only continues throughout where I am currently up to. Some will argue that it is only an issue when you don't know that, and it forces you to learn more of the map in the game, which is true, but it added further frustration in certain areas when you're just getting into a constant loop of being hit or dodging and inevitably die. The other issue is that there seems to be considerably less shortcuts than the base game, which With some of the boss placements or being ganked by several enemies rushing you at once, I spent more time than I did in the base game simply running back. It's my understanding that boss runbacks were a thing in the original Dark Souls games. However, I feel that it detracts from the game and makes it more tedious than anything. I would prefer a harder encounter and a quick run back so that I can make more attempts that much faster. And the annoyance is made all the worse if you get ganks while you're trying to get back. The normal and elite enemies each provide their own danger, being able to quickly ruin your day if you don't treat them with the respect that they deserve. On the legendary stalker difficulty, enemies can quickly lower your health, and some enemies actually gave me a lot of strife initially with their new moves compared to the base game, forcing you to adapt their moveset and think differently about how you want to engage them. The bosses, however, were a nice step up from the base game, with the first boss of the game giving me an extremely close fight, although I did manage to defeat it on my second attempt. I know that a lot of people struggled with this boss from searching online, although the real boss of this encounter, and unfortunately some other encounters, is the camera. This sometimes makes things way harder than it needs to be, and may oftentimes end up getting you killed because of it. Markiona and the Queen's puppet was a bit of an annoying encounter, and after the first boss being a challenge with the camera, I didn't have high hopes for the bosses themselves, and figured that more of the design may have gone into the world building. It was extremely tedious going after the puppet, as it would often simply fly away from me, being unhittable. Eventually though, I managed to do enough damage when the puppet was close by to the main target that it allowed significant opening, and I got the kill on them both. My favourite encounter thus far has to be Veronique, leader of the sweepers. The quick attacks with so much force behind them kept the fight engaging, and I found that this was the most balanced for encounters thus far on the challenge scale and reward for successful parries. There's been another encounter later which will see you parrying constantly, although I didn't want to mention too much of the game as I believe these are best experienced with little to no knowledge. My favourite area of the game thus far has to be the circus. It feels so well designed, and the puppets which are spread around all feel so curated to the experience. In fact, for each of the areas you go in, enemies feel very well suited to their locations. With my only issue, there's another underground sewer section feeling a little bit stale, although thankfully this leads into an experimental prison medical type area with a lot of items to pick up for additional story. Similar to the base game, you're also rewarded again for exploring, finding chests and safes, with additional loot for utility items or upgrade items, although it feels just a tad more linear than the base game. The boss run system has clearly been put in to fill a niche, and I imagine it will be a welcome addition for the more experienced players within the player base, especially due to the lack of summons, offering a quick challenge for any of the encounters from both the base game and the DLC at a select difficulty, and you can even select a higher difficulty once you've completed the previous. If you die during any of these encounters, you will quickly put back outside without losing anything to go back in and try your luck again. While I appreciate this here, it does feel all that much weirder considering the runbacks I had to do during my playthrough thus far. I also wonder if the harder difficulties will become available as an overall option that you can select from for the more hardcore player base, and not only an option within the boss run system. You can also select multiple bosses to face off in sequence to give a true test of your mettle. With limited supplies, going up against 3 bosses back to back will provide great challenge and is sure to add plenty of playtime. Lies of P Overture looks to be an extremely promising addition, and I am excited not only for more Lies of P, but to see what this studio continues to deliver. If you have not yet played Lies of P, I would strongly recommend it, and with the new difficulty settings, the game will be that much more approachable to newcomers alike, so hopefully it will entice people that much more.